Hello and welcome back to the channel. I'm going to take a look at dynamic mud in this particular video. The Nebraska lands map is now been out for a little while actually, but I wanted to play it for a little bit first before I kind of did a video on dynamic mud. Sometimes when these features are added, they sound fantastic and, all dynamic mud, everybody get excited. But I wanted to actually test it for myself and see what it was like before I did a video on it. There are a couple of things I'm not particularly, I like very much. The way that some vehicles react to it in a way I don't particularly like for gameplay. It might be realistic of some sort, but if it really affects my gameplay to the point where I can't actually move a vehicle, at all, and it should be able to do just that. It's got tracks, and I think it should be able to move through the mud much better than it does in the game using this dynamic mud system. But for the most part, I'm really liking it. It adds an extra element to the game, which is always a good thing in my opinion. There's a couple of things that I kind of think need to be tweaked here and there, maybe a little bit, but for the most part, like I say, it's fine. So I've got a sample mod map. This is just Felsbrun, which I'm going to try and basically put it onto. There's a little bit that I'm not really sure about as far as what needs to be brought over. I've not actually done this yet. This would be my first run through on it. I've had a little bit of a look through the i3D in the map and identified some different files, but I haven't really got the time to kind of spend doing it over, in its entirety, get it working, then hit record and have to do it all over again. So I figured I would just kind of wing it and see what happens, and hopefully I can work out what parts need to be where and all the rest of it. Just a bit of luck if I can get that today, and we'll work through that hopefully as we go through it. So the first thing I would say is to identify various different files that you're going to want to bring over and things like that, because most of the time maps are now in 19, everything is linked back into the game installation folder, so there's very little texture files and things like that in the map itself, which is a good thing in my opinion, because it limits or reduces the size of the actual file size, if you like, of mods and maps and things like that. But it does mean that sometimes when you're customizing things by adding in extra parts, it can then start to get a little bit confusing on what needs to be where and how it needs to be identified and allocated and all that other stuff. So and you don't want to get conflicts between certain files that are being linked back to the game installation folder with ones that you're going to then have in your actual map folder. So we've got a couple of scripts that we need to work with. There's the dynamic mud Lua script, and also there's the terrain control, which they both work together. So we need that. We also need the dirt particle system set up, which is basically being controlled by the mod itself. I forget which one it is now, but one of these, this one here, scripts dirt ps dirt 2 i3D. So that one is basically linking back into here to tell it what to do and what, all the particle systems and whatever else. So we need that one as well. But I don't want the other ones. I don't need all these other ones here. So I think what we'll do first of all in the maps folder here, maybe I'll put it in there. I'm not sure yet. Yeah, maybe I'll put it here because that's where it is in this one. Sorry about the phone. It's in the root folder there. So yeah, we'll just put it here. That's fine. So create a new folder. Scripts. If you haven't already noticed, I've got a cold again. I've always got a dang cold. So apologies for that. You'll have to just bear with me on this. Right, let's copy those over. Okay, so and then what I'm going to do is let's open up the map i3D here in Notepad++. You can use whatever text editor works for you. So if I go Control F to bring up the find window here, and we go down to materials, bottom of materials, that's just how I do it, but you can search for whatever you want to search for as you go through it. So we have this extra layer combiner, which is called mud. It's within where the tip coal, farmland, and if you have seasons on the map. So it's basically like a layer value that's being created that you paint down and whatever else. Similar to the fashion how the tip coal on the farmland works. So we're going to want to have that line come out of there. So I'm going to make a copy of that line. We'll create a new text document here and paste that over there. And then if we go to the file ID, so if I double click on that, Control F, and I'll do a backwards direction and I'll match whole word only, because I know that this is a file ID because it tells me it is. So if I do that, we'll go back up until we get to the appropriate place, which is just here. So we have this one, map01 mud underscore weight PNG. So I'm going to make a copy of that one, and then we'll also bring that over. So like so. And then if I actually go into the map itself, so if I close that one down, what I'm going to do is, if I open this up, and you'll just have to bear with me, I might pause here while this is loading up. If we actually go, let's see now, so if I go down to where the tip coal, farmlands, all that sort of stuff is, you can see we have this additional entry under the info layer painting section, mud. And if I then turn on the terrain info layer paint mode, which is the I thing there, you can see how we have all this sort of mask over the map, similar to what we did with 17 seasons. This green stuff all over the place. That is basically telling you where the mud is. But there's two types of mud that we have to take into consideration. If I actually go into the script, and I forget which one it is again, but one of these tells you, there you go, dynamic mud, always mud is channel 1, and dynamic mud channel 2 is basically, it will kind of dynamically shift depending on the weather patterns and whatever else. So you can, if the ground is very wet, then it will be more dynamic, whereas if there's always water puddles down, any mud around the water puddles will always be muddy, if that makes sense. So we have to take into consideration these two different channels when we're actually working with the mud and whatever. So if we go back into the map, you can see here we have on channel info channel 0, which is channel 1, if you like, layer value 1, which is this one, and that was always mud. So in these areas we're always going to have mud. If you have seasons, it will differ, I think, slightly depending on the ground moisture, but it'll always be muddy. But then we have also this one, which is info channel 1, and then layer value 2, and then it changes. So then it will become more dynamic. That's to my understanding anyway. Like I said, this is the first kind of look at it in the map itself and working through it, so you'll kind of have to get your head around that yourself. So I'm going to go through it the best I can here, but if I go back to this one, you can see that there are some areas here which are a little bit different. You can see that there's like this area here, so this one over here would be let's say channel 1, which would be always muddy, and then this one here, you can see it's a little bit different. I'm like I said, I'm still trying to get my head around the differences with how that sort of stuff works. It's kind of very similar to the way the farmland system works with the different coloured channels and whatever else. So I'm assuming that somewhere in this area here would be under this channel because it's the green. And then the other parts here, the white you can see through there, would be more dynamic, which would be painted down under channel 2, let's say. Like channels and layers, and it gets very confusing when you're looking at all these. I prefer to work with the info channels and not this stupid layer value drop down. It can be helpful when you're working with your farmlands to see all these different layer values, but in my opinion it gets bloody complicated when you're trying to select different things, because if you select these directly from the drop down, the system won't work. It won't change. You have to physically allocate the info channels before it will actually give you the correct layer value. So this drop down is only for visual anyway. It doesn't do anything. You can't select anything in there and actually apply it because it doesn't work. So I think that should be removed, in my opinion. It's more of a hindrance because it then confuses you between the info channels and the layer values, because everything that is actually identified in the XMLs is talking about channels, but when you look in here and you look under channels, these are actually bits. The channels are these ones. So the terminology between the two is not consistent. And it then becomes really confusing, in my opinion. But whatever. So let's go back to the mud. Yeah. So when you paint it down, basically you'll have to kind of determine what areas you want to be dynamic and what areas you want to have as always muddy. Again, this would be different if you're playing with seasons or not. I believe the always muddy areas will still be somewhat changeable throughout the seasons period, depending on the ground moisture. I could be wrong on that, but if you're not playing with seasons, then you know, it'll work again slightly differently. But I'm just getting my head around it myself, so I just wanted to do a video on how to actually adapt a map to get mud into it, and then you will have to kind of determine what areas you want to be always muddy and what areas you want to be more dynamic, I guess, and then kind of integrate that with your seasons play if you choose to use the seasons mod. But the reason why I came in here is, one, to show you all of that, but two, so I can actually see where the areas are painted in with the dynamic mud or always mud or whatever else, and then work out what textures are being used, because there needs to be something painted on the map that's going to determine what those areas are. And I think potentially you would not want to stick with one of the default textures. You would want a custom layout that's going to be painted in where that dynamic mud is going to be put on the map. So if we actually look at this area here, you can see that's where it's going to be painted out. Always muddy, I think that one is, and then this one would be the dynamic. Again, like I say, it's a bit yeah. But if I then come out of that and go into the terrain paint mode, you can see we have this dirt texture down on the ground. And then what I did earlier on was to actually determine what that was. So I thought, well, okay, it might just use the rough dirt, and then wherever you paint rough dirt down, that's basically going to be where the mud works. But if I paint down rough dirt, it doesn't match in, it's completely different. So then I went through the menu here, and you can see we have this alternative one here. If I paint that down, that matches in with what's on the ground. So I figured that had to be what was being used. So with that in mind, it's very difficult to see the name here, rough dirt, and then we just get this BRAL, and you can't really tell what that is in here. So if I close this down, we go back into the i3D, and I then do a search down through the materials again, just to get to my position again. This is how I like to do it, because it's going to be a texture layer, and I can just go from the bottom of the materials section and then into the actual terrain stuff. And you can see we have our rough dirt, which is our default, and then we have this rough dirt BR Alt 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's the one that it's using for the dynamic mud, if you like. Wherever that is painted down is where the dynamic, or at least in that area, you can paint down the mud wherever you want, but in this particular area on the map, that is where the dynamic mud is going to be painted down. So again, it's working with all the different textures and how that's going to play into where you're going to put your dynamic mud. So potentially, I guess these ones here are not absolutely required, because if I had the animal mud, which I'm not actually sure if this one has it on, yes it does down here, because there are some slight differences between Felsbrunn and Ravenport. I think Ravenport has dark mud or dark dirt or something like that, not rough dirt, if I remember rightly. So there are some different there are some differences between the textures that use the terrain textures between the two different maps. So yeah, you have to take those into consideration as well. But I guess in theory you wouldn't necessarily need this alternative one. You could just paint down the mud, the dirt, the animal mud, or whatever else, and then just paint your dynamic mud in places wherever you wanted it. So we're going to have a look at that as well and just see what that's all about. So I'm not going to worry about these at the moment, but I just wanted to show you those because these textures are or the name of this layout is not in either Felsbrunn or Ravenport. Now it's possible that this particular texture was taken from one of the other maps, depending on what the base map of the Nebraska lands was based on. It might be an alternative of that texture taken from one of the maps. I don't know. I'd have to look further into that to see which one matches, but we're going to have a bit of a play around with that. It might be something that needs to be added in, but in all the when I looked through all the scripting and everything, there was no referencing to this particular terrain layer, so I don't think it will be absolutely necessary. But if you wanted to break it up so you didn't use, you could paint down. What we don't want here, I believe, is an association between the scripting of the dynamic mud and a particular texture, because you could, I believe, paint it down wherever you wanted to. There's no reason why you couldn't have mud on grass or whatever. I don't know. Like I say, this is my kind of first run through on this, and I'm just kind of winging it and seeing where it takes me. So for now, I'm not going to bother with that. I'm just going to leave it out, and then we'll just add it in if required later on. Or you could add it in if you wanted to. You just need to take this information from here and then find all of the mapping and whatever else, the default, the actual diffuse and normal textures, and then structure your map to work with it. But might do that later on as well. I'm not sure yet. We'll just see how it plays out. Okay, so I have the information there for that. So I'm not going to get in. Not going to do those just yet. So we'll close that down. And then what I will do is let's go into map 01 here, because we have this mud weight GRLE. And what I'm going to do is, if I go into here, map DE, I'm just going to basically copy that over and put it into here. And then right, let's just see what we've got in here. So we go down to this one here, which is the actual map XML. We need to copy over this information. We have this mud density file name, so we need to copy that over. So I'm going to make a copy of that, and I will then open up the map XML for this one, and we'll paste that in. Let's come down to here, make a few lines, and paste that into there like so. So this is map 01, but I've actually got map DE, so I need to change change that to matching, so it's got the right file name and everything. So we'll just do like so, don't need that anymore. And then we'll start to add in some other parts. So let's do mod desk. So let's open this one up. If we come into here, we've got these extra source files. I'm just going to copy the whole lot, and I'll just delete what I don't need. So we'll go into here and then open up this mod desk, and let's do there somewhere, and we'll paste that in. And then I'm going to get rid of this, get rid of those, and then we just want this one here, because the dynamic mud lure references the terrain control lure directly from the actual script itself, so we only need to put the extra source file of the dynamic mud lure in the mod desk. The other one is referenced within this particular lure script anyway, so we don't need both of them in here. So we'll go ahead and save that, close that down. Okay, so I will then I'll close that map down, and then we'll open up the sample mod map here, i3D, and then I'm going to take the file name here, and what I'm going to do is just add in on the end 3 zeros. So we'll do the same with this one as well, 3 zeros. So if I copy that line, and we'll add that into the file IDs over here, so we'll do like so. And then this one here, the actual info layer, we're going to take a copy of that. I'm going to come over here, Control F, and I'll go to the bottom of the materials section. Then I'm going to scroll down to where we have our tip coal and farmland, and then I'm going to make a new line in there and paste that one into there like so, and then we'll just bring that along so it all lines up correctly. There we go. So that's that part done. So if we close that, save that, close it down, I'm going to leave that up there for now just to make sure that I don't actually what I would need to do here, because the other one was map 01, I need to make sure that that is changed to map DE. So let's do map DE. Make sure your file names are correct, otherwise it won't find the appropriate parts you need. So we'll close that one down now, and then come down to here. So if I open up the sample mod map here, and this is literally a sample mod map of Felsbrunn, I've just created it for the particular tutorial here, so it's got no or video, so it's got no extras or additions in it. It's literally a fresh sample mod map. Okay, so as you can see, Felsbrunn, if I come down to here, what we should have under the info layer painting is an additional layer value, which is our mud. So if we click on that one and then click on our terrain info layer paint mode, you can see that there's already some detail on the map, because I've not edited the actual weight file that came from Nebraska lands. So all of these markings on here are for Nebraska lands. Now what you have to be a bit careful of here is, because of the differences between the two maps, the Nebraska lands is a 4x map, whereas this is not. This is a standard 2x if you want to call it. I don't know what the standard is, but I think it's like a 2x. So you have to be a bit careful with that, because it might cause some issues between the two different file types. Freaking phone. There's no errors in here or anything. So what I would do potentially is I do that one. Yeah, so let's I guess what you could do is, before you exported it from Nebraska lands, would be to delete all of the mud, so it blanks it out completely, and then export it and then save it. But obviously that's going to break that map. So we'll not break it, but it's going to remove all the mud layer values, so you would want to make a backup of it or whatever else before you did that. But theoretically what I should be able to do here is just remove it in here. So if I go up to here, make my brush really big maybe, so let's type in there 1000, and I'll change it to square, and let's just delete all of this. Like so. If I then switch over to the other channel, let's just see what that gives me. It shouldn't give me anything at all, but you can never tell sometimes with these different info channels. Okay, so if I do this one then, and we'll make our brush small again. And then I'm just going to paint down one area. I'm not going to get too fancy with this. It's just to show you, the mud working or whatever else. So what I could potentially do here is paint in some mud down here. So if we remember rightly, we had info channel 0 is always mud. So if I paint down on this side here, we'll paint in here, and this will always be mud. So we'll just paint in something like that. And then what I will do is over here, I'll put down some dynamic mud. So if I switch over to this channel and I paint it in here, so this will be dynamic mud, and that will always be mud. That's the idea behind it anyway. So we'll just go with that. I'm not going to get too fancy. Like I say, it's just to show you how to get the mud in the map, in a map. So we have our two different channels. So if I switch back to the first one, this is our green, which is our dynamic. And then this one over here. Did I do that the wrong way around? Sorry. Yeah, this one over here, sorry. So the one to the right of the buildings is our always mud, which is in white at the moment. So the green is our dynamic. And then if we go over to here, our red is the always mud. We'll see what happens with that. Like I said, info channels and layer values, they can be very confusing at times on what does what and all the rest of it. But going by the script itself, that's the way I see it working. So we'll just see how that plays out. Okay, so what we're going to do then is just basically save the map. And as you could see there, I could easily paint that down because it's just an info layer value. I didn't need to add in any additional terrain textures or whatever else. So the fact that the Nebraska lands has got that additional rough dirt BR ALL alternate whatever it was texture, I would imagine that's just a preference on the mod author who wanted to put in a specific texture in certain areas of the map. I don't know, but you don't need those. I just wanted to show you them earlier on because it was something that I found was an addition over the standard, or what I would call standard terrain textures that you would find in either Felsburn or Ravenport. But from what I could see, that was an alternative one which appeared to be under where the dynamic mud had been painted on the map, or at least the layer value. But you don't need them. It can be painted wherever you want them to be, as far as I can tell. You don't need those extra textures. You can just put it wherever you want on your map. You could put it over your in the middle of a field or wherever you wanted. You could cover your entire field with dynamic mud if you wanted to. Hell, cover the whole map with it. Wouldn't recommend it, but you could do that if you wanted to. Okay, so that's now saved. Awesome. So we should now have dynamic mud in those particular areas, and the scripting will then all work. So just to show you, we come into here, dynamic mud. If we look in here, you can see that we have some different parts in here, looking at various different things. Pretty sure when I looked through this earlier on, it actually references the terrain control lure directly from this script, which is what I was saying earlier. You don't need this. You don't need both of those. I can actually close that down now. Don't need that. You don't need to have the terrain control lure referenced in your mod desk because it's directly referenced from the dynamic mud lure. And as long as you've got all of your file names correct, so make sure that when you're doing this, that you actually look at the different file names. So this is very important. If you're putting your folders or your scripts in different folders from what the Nebraska lands setup is. So if you have, for example, a sample map, maps, mods, scripts, you would need to adjust your file name for all of the different scripting, and also depending on where you're going to put your particle systems for the dirt, you would need to again adjust the file name here so that it could locate that i3D. So just be a bit aware of that. Depending on your map structure, you can get a bit confused on why things aren't working, and it can be because certain things are referenced directly from within the scripts themselves, and you need to adjust those file names. But otherwise, I'm hoping that everything there is as it should be. So what I'm going to do then, if I've got it right, which I hope I have, we'll go into here, and I'm going to just put that into there. I'm not going to work with seasons on this particular one. I don't want to make this a massively long video. So I'm just going to basically go into game and we'll test this one out. And with any luck, we should have dynamic mud. Okay, so let's load up the map just so you can see I'm not doing anything behind the scenes. We'll do a sample mod map and we'll load in just the map itself, nothing else. Yeah, like I was saying earlier on, there are certain aspects of the dynamic mud that I'm not particularly finding. I don't know if realistic is the right word to use, but I've on the Nebraska lands map specifically, I've got the animal pasture for pigs down in the bottom left-hand corner of the map. I don't know what the actual area is called exactly because I haven't been playing the map that long. I was really just testing out some different things to do with dynamic mud and various bits and pieces, and there is quite a lot of mud painted around in that particular area. And what I found was that where the dynamic mud is painted, down in that area quite heavily, I guess, or whatever else, it seemed to be quite heavy. I don't know. The little skid steer with the tracks that I got, the whole tracks were practically sinking into the ground, and made it very difficult to do anything with it. And I also then found that when it was, I am running with Caesar's mod, when the ground was very wet, I would drive into the actual pig pasture, pig pen, whatever you want to call it, to empty out my trailer of pig food. But because the actual trailer was sinking so heavily into the mud, I was not always able to get the actual trigger to work to tip my pig food from the trailer itself. I would have to kind of drive in at high speed so that the actual tractor, I didn't give the tractor chance enough to sink into the dynamic mud and very, very quickly press the button to tip my pig food. If I sat in the trigger for too long, the dynamic mud effects would kick in and my whole trailer would sink, and then the actual trigger would no longer work. So it was causing me some conflicts between triggers and things like that. So that was something that I found to be quite annoying in certain places. So let's just have a look in here. Okay, so we've got a ton of errors because, as I said, I've literally just created this sample mod map, and because of the way, for some stupid reason, the Giants editor, when you're making a new mod from game, it still doesn't, and I guess it's an easy fix, so they've never bothered to update the Giants editor to do it properly, but it doesn't change the actual file name correctly, or doesn't create the correct file name in the default items XML for all of the placeable stuff and also for the vehicles. But whatever, I guess. So let's have a look what we've got. I've painted down mud here, dynamic mud that is, and I've also painted it down over here. I'm not seeing anything different at the moment, so what we'll do then, let's get a pretty big tractor. That'll do, so we can test this out. What I'll do is I'll get let's get some big old wheels and tyres on it. That'll do. Oops, let's okay, so let's cheat in some money here. That'll do. Then we'll do that again. We come back into here. Let's what have we got? There's tracks, twins. Yeah, let's do twins, why not? So let's do that. Okay, so let's go over to here then. Get into the tractor. Turn my speakers down. Let's have a look. So obviously when you're working with a dynamic mud, you would probably want it to look like mud, which could be another reason why there was that alternative texture, because it looks a little bit wetter than the standard. Yeah, so if I actually... Yeah, you can see the mud. I don't know if that's coming through very clear, but you can see the dynamic mud there flicking up. I'm pretty sure that it's not taking into consideration the extra tyres on the outside, which is why you can't see it very easily splashing up from the outside. It's more inside. If I go over that again, you can see the dynamic mud there flicking up, but it's only taking into consideration the inner tyres, not the outer ones, I think. Might be doing the outer ones as well. Oh no, I don't know. Just looks more internal, like splashing inside, but there's nothing much outside, as you can see there, which to me looks like it's actually taking into consideration more so the inner tyres and wheels than it is the outer ones. Maybe ignoring the outer ones altogether. Difficult to tell there, but the dynamic mud is working. That's the key thing. So what we'll do is, just so that we can actually see this a bit clearer, I didn't realise, or I didn't think about the fact that it wouldn't see those outer tyres. So let's get another one. We will put some bigger wheels on it though, but we'll just keep it single, and we'll try that again. Okay, so let's try that again. So yeah, I mean, you know, I think you could clearly see there that the dynamic mud was working. We were getting quite a lot of splashes come up from the tyres. But as I say, it just didn't appear to be showing the yeah, there we go, that's better, you can see it a bit clearer now. So we have dynamic mud there, but remember this side is always mud, so we have our mud all splashing up. There we go, you can see it a bit clearer there. Whereas this side I painted down in the other channel, which was dynamic mud. Now I don't know, without seasons this doesn't appear to be splashing up anything at the moment, so it might require it to be raining or something. Stupid collisions. It might require it to rain or something on this area. I'm not entirely sure, or that might be specific for seasons. Like I say, I'm still trying to get my head around all of the aspects of it. Doesn't seem to really make much difference on that side, but this side does. So again, that's another thing you would need to look at, how that's going to play in. Yeah, because it's obviously working over that side, because that side where I am now is, I painted down as always mud, whereas the other side was dynamic. So I don't know what the what references the dynamic stuff. You know, does it have to be raining? Is it specific to seasons? I couldn't tell you, but obviously this stuff works over here. We were getting mud flicking up and whatever else, and the wheels and tyres were sinking down into it and all that sort of stuff. So again, this comes back to your textures. That might be why there was that additional texture or alternative texture, so that it looked a little bit wetter, which would give you a better visual representation of a muddy track or whatever. Whereas this particular texture, you know, you would look at that and go, well, that ain't muddy at all. And then you bring your tractor in here and it'll start to sink, and you just visually it just wouldn't give you the right kind of experience. So you'd need to be a little bit careful, I guess, on where you painted if you want it to be visually, I hate the word realistic because this is a game at the end of the day, but if you wanted it to look more realistic, then a different texture than just a standard rough dirt might be required. I guess you could paint down like your animal mud or whatever else. It just depends on how mad you decide to go with the dynamic mud or the mud in general, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, there we go. It is working. That's the main thing. So, it's fairly straightforward process. There's only 2 lines of text that you need to bring over if you don't want to work with alternative textures that need to be adjusted in the i3D. There's a couple lines that you need to bring over. One, there's 3 actually for the mod desk. There's 1 for your map XML. And make sure you get your file names all set up correctly. And as far as that, obviously you need to bring over your mud weight texture and put that in the appropriate folder, and then link all that in with your different file names. But I've shown all that in the video, so hopefully what I have shown will make sense and give you some information to go on how to set it all up and whatever else. I'm Show Wizard. Thanks very much for watching. I will catch you on the next one.